We have with us today former U.S. Surgeon General Vivek wrote, "As I finish my tenure as Surgeon General, this is my parting prescription. My final wish for all of us: choose community." Welcome, Dr. Murthy.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Scarlett. I'm so glad to be here with you today.
I'm so happy to have you. And I was explaining to you earlier how so much of your work and your incredible book, which I have here,
Mhm.
which is dog-eared, underlined, and highlighted, has really informed my work in Choose Love and the message that I spread. And it seems to be getting more and more important as we move through our world.
Yes, it does. It feels like the ideals of love and compassion they're old, right? They show up in our scripture, they show up in our experiences that people have written about for millennia. Yet somehow it's become clear that if we are not intentional about cultivating them and about expressing them in our lives, they can get buried and they can get overshadowed by other ideals or values or directions. And so I do think that this is a moment where we have to ask ourselves what really matters for us to live a life that's healthy, happy, and fulfilling. This is what we want for ourselves, but it's especially what we want for our kids. And my worry, and this is the reason actually I wrote this parting prescription to America in January of this year. My worry is that there are a lot of forces that are pushing us in a different direction, especially our kids, that are telling them that there are other paths they should take to happiness, and that those paths, as I think of them, are rooted around the triad of success, if you will, money, fame, and power. This is what young people would tell me all the time when I would ask them about what defines success. But what we know from, again, science, scripture, experience over thousands of years is that there's a different triad we need if we want to truly be fulfilled. And that's relationships, purpose, and service. Those are the three elements, when anchored in the core virtue of love, that ultimately drive fulfillment in our life. And our mission right now, our calling, if we, I would say, is to really build a culture and a life that's centered around that triad of fulfillment.
I think that's what we all want.
Yeah.
But how do you think that we got so far off course?
Yeah, I think a number of things happened. When you have this kind of massive shift, it's usually not one force, but it's several things. So one, we had multiple things that were actually pulling us apart, or at least preventing us from coming together. Number one, about a half century ago, we started seeing a decline in the participation in organizations that traditionally did bring us together, like faith organizations, service organizations, recreational leagues.
Mhm.
But we also have seen that people now travel more, they move more, right? They change jobs more often. Again, nothing wrong with that. Wonderful opportunities can come from that. But what that means is that we leave communities and people behind, and we haven't always been intentional about compensating for that. And technology has been interesting as well, because it's been another force that has been a mixed blessing in our lives. So I could sit in the comfort of my own home and stream any movie I want, get any groceries that I want, have anything delivered to me from the store. I never need to go out and see a person ever. But it turns out that well, it has efficiency gains. A lot of those interactions with people in a grocery store, seeing your neighbor as you walked up and down the street, those actually matter to us, to our health, and to our well-being, and ultimately to our sense of connection. I do think, in particular, though, when it comes to technology, that the development of social media, sadly for many people, hasn't been anything but social. If anything, it has contributed to a major shift of relationships from in-person to online, a focus from quality of relationships to quantity of relationships. And this is one of the things I actually talked about in the report I published in 2023 on social media and youth mental health, which is that many people, young people, but also folks who are not so young, perhaps, talk about the impact that social media has on their self-esteem, on their relationships with other people, as they constantly are comparing themselves to others, seeing what people are doing without them, and then feeling left behind as a result. So it's been a lot of forces that have ultimately led us to be disconnected from each other. But finally, I think that culturally, we've seen with social media in particular, the ability to supercharge certain cultural norms. So, for example, as a society, for a long time, people have looked at folks who are rich or famous or powerful and idolize them in some way. But what has happened is that I think our focus on those elements and attributes are defining success by those three elements of, power, fame, and fortune have been supercharged. And so the stories that we hear about, the people we read about, the lifestyles that we encounter on social media online are primarily driven by those kind of elements and ideals. Now, again, just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with being rich or being powerful or with being famous. Nothing wrong at all. And if one wants to pursue those, you should and best of luck and Godspeed. But the problem comes when we assume that it's the pursuit of power, wealth, and fame that will bring us fulfillment. And that actually is not the case. That is the promise, in a sense, that we are culturally making to young people today that is failing them. Because what's happening is that people chase those and they work very hard, in pursuit of those ideals, but often find that once they get there, it's not necessarily bringing them the deep fulfillment that they need, the fulfillment that comes ultimately and needs to come from relationships, from having a sense of purpose rooted in lifting others up, and from being engaged in service and helping others in your life.
It's really incredible, and you can see some of these influencers
Mhm.
who are killing themselves, seemingly having made it with all of these
Mhm.
followers and a big presence online. Even we look in Hollywood, and those people will also tell you that there's a void inside.
Yeah.
That void can't be filled with money or drugs or anger or power or anything else. And I think that's what people try to fill that void with. Only love. Only love.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you use that word void because the sense of emptiness, the sense that something is missing like inside of me in my life. This is something I would hear about all the time when I travel and talk to people and try to really understand how they're really doing. And we all respond differently to that emptiness. But that emptiness, that feeling that, we are not enough, that life is not enough, that can feel painful. And there are many ways of responding to pain. You can, for example, respond to pain and stress by going for a run, for example, or by choosing to call up a friend and connect with them, or by throwing yourself into helping, others who are in need in front of you and reducing their pain. Or you can also turn to things that can numb your pain, right? Whether, as you mentioned, sometimes it may be alcohol or other drugs. It could be violence in some cases. It could be immersing yourself in an online world, to distract yourself or to numb the pain. Um, and this is not to pass judgment. In the likelihood, most of us do some combination of these things that help us and hurt us, right, over the course of our life. But the point is, what many of us are often trying to do is to fill that void in our life, to ease that pain. And as human beings, we look for relief when we feel pain. And so the question I think we have to ask ourselves is in our lives and in the lives of our kids and those around us, how can we create more of a culture, more of a practice of reaching for helpful ways to reduce our pain? And we know that when we serve other people, for example, as counterintuitive as that may be, that's one of the most powerful things that we can do to address the pain that comes from loneliness and from emptiness. We also know that when we connect deeply with another human being, could be an old friend or could be a stranger, it might just be momentary, but it can feel good for a long time afterwards because we are hardwired to connect with one another. So these solutions, in some ways, may seem almost disarmingly simple. Like, how is being kind to a stranger, or helping a colleague at work, or trying to help somebody else going to help me when I'm the one who's suffering, when I'm the one who's feeling the pain? But what helping others does, what service is so powerful at achieving, is not only on forging a connection with somebody else, but on reminding us that as empty as we sometimes may feel, there is still something powerful and valuable and worthy inside of us. And I use that word worthy very intentionally because my heart has been broken by all the young people I meet across the country and the world who feel that they are not worthy, who are looking at the constant stream of images and lifestyles of people they encounter online and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't measure up. I must not be worthy. Um, and it's never going to get better. But I want my kids to know, my kids are 7 and 8, and I want all kids to know that their worth is not based on anything that they may acquire. Their fundamental intrinsic worth as a human being is not based on the grades they get, the school that they may get into, how much money they have, how many followers they have on social media. Their worth is intrinsic. Our worth as human beings is something that we are born with, and it comes from our ability to give and to receive love. And I
Mm.
see this in my own kids, right? I see, and I think when we watch kids, one of the powerful things about that is they actually remind us of what really matters in life. And so I, I say that because even today, like, and especially today, I find myself watching my kids a little bit more, looking at their instincts, looking at how they think about approaching the world. And sometimes it reminds me that, you know what, it's okay to trust others. It's okay to laugh at things that are silly. It's good to notice that small thing which seems like it's just normal, but to find wonder in it, the way a child does. It's okay to be vulnerable, to be open with how we feel the way my kids do, but the way that many times as adults we hesitate from doing because we worry that we're going to get judged.
So true. Kids are so present, aren't they? And
They
they're
are.
in the
Yeah.
moment. And I love seeing the world through their eyes. And then I think as we grow up, it becomes complicated
Yeah.
and and sometimes layered with trauma and
Uh-huh.
and pain. And so real so important to be able to fortify our kids from the inside out in how to grow through pain. Now, I just wanted to, as you're talking, Dr. Murthy, I'm thinking it's so easy to pick up my phone and scroll through it. It's so
Yeah.
easy to sit down with a drink and pleasurable. And not it seems like it takes a little bit more effort to actually get up, go out, visit my neighbor, do an act of service. And so and that's a little some of the resistance I think maybe I felt with Choose Love is that it is a proactive preventative approach. It is a little bit of effort. It's asking people to take responsibility for their lives, for where they are right now and where they're going. And so it does seem so simple, but simple isn't always easy.
Yeah.
And what would you say to those people who are thinking, that it sounds so wonderful, but I know that tonight when I go to bed, I'm going to pick up my cell phone and scroll instead of calling a friend, which takes just a little bit more effort.
Well, what I would say to everybody who's struggling with that is that I'm with you. I've struggled with this as well. I think most of us do. And it's not because we're bad people or because we completely lack willpower. It's not like this generation of people who are living today somehow, had a deletion of the willpower gene, and compared to prior generations. By the way, there is no willpower gene. But the point is that we are normal human beings whose digital environment is completely different than what prior generations encountered. And so if you find yourself unable to get off your phone, it's because that was by design, not by accident, right? Our devices were designed to pull us in. They were designed by some of the most talented product engineers in the world to maximize how much time we spend on them, particularly our social media accounts. And so, even though that is not an accident, we now have to contend with how to manage that, how to choose people and service and solitude over, sort of the endless doom scrolling that can sometimes suck us in. So, how do we do this? So, I have found that number one, all behavior change is easier when you're doing it with somebody else. Like whether you're trying to get on a diet, start a gym routine, change your social media habits, break up with your phone, whatever it is, much harder to do on your own. And as somebody who has tried and failed to make changes many times over the course of my life, I found what ultimately helped me succeed was making a commitment with a friend and saying, "Hey, let's do this together." Or if you don't want to do it, at least help keep me accountable. Like, here's what I'm going to promise to do. You pick something that you want to do, and let's help each other, like stay on the path.
Mhm.
The other thing I found that's important is actually to start small. Like there, you can't, it's hard to make a whole bunch of changes in your life at the same time. To say, okay, on January 1st, I'm going to start a new gym routine. I'm going to overhaul my diet. I'm going to stop checking social media every hour, and I'm going to call my kids, once a day. Like it is very, very hard to make all these changes at once. So pick one thing and start with one thing. I'll tell you something that I picked and started with a few years ago. I was actually scheduled to have surgery on my hand, after an injury. And I was having that surgery. I was about to have the surgery, and a couple of friends of mine called me up and they said, "So you're going to have a couple of days after this when you're going to be recovering. You're going to be, working less than you normally did because you literally use your hand to type. So it's a great time to make a change in your life. What kind of change do you want to make?" I thought, huh, this is interesting. And I said, well, one of the problems I've had is that I'm not, I feel like I'm checking social media too often, and I want to stop doing that. And they said, okay, well, let's start now. So I deleted the apps, on my phones, and I told myself, okay, I'm not gonna check my social media accounts for a while. I'm gonna see how that feels, but I'm gonna talk to my friends every few days, and if I feel like I'm like starting to slip, I'm gonna text them, and then they're gonna call me, and we're gonna figure it out together. It's now been a few years since I made that decision. And I will tell you that I had made that decision at other times in my life, but had been unable to follow through because I was doing it alone. And I
Yeah.
didn't have these friends to whom I felt like some degree of accountability. And I'll be honest, like the no differences in my life that I noticed were actually pretty substantial almost from the get-go. At the beginning, you always feel a little twitchy, like when you make a decision like that. Something you're used to doing all the time and you stop doing it, it's hard, right? But after a few days, I found I had more time to read. And I felt guilty that I wasn't reading as much as I wanted to for years, that had dropped out of my life. The second thing I noticed is that I was actually more present with people in my life, particularly my family, the people who I spent the most time with. And this is really important to me because I do think as parents, it's really important that we're good role models whenever we can be. Doesn't mean we have to be perfect, but we have to try to be good role models. And I was realizing that I wasn't as present and I was on my devices more in front of my kids more often than I wanted to be. And it's just this compulsive thing. Like your devices in your pocket, you just pick it out, you're checking, etc. Um, but I realized I didn't want to live like that, and I was doing less of that, after making this pact. So these kind of, it's one step at a time that we do. I made another decision recently. This is not related to technology, but yeah, it was. I realized that during my time in office, I had actually put on a few pounds, and I wanted to lose that weight. And I had made some decisions. Okay, I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to snack, et cetera, et cetera. But I found myself kind of slipping here and there, or like, not necessarily realizing how much I was, eating here and there and letting junk food creep in from time to time. So I made a similar pact with two friends who were in a similar boat. They had put on some pounds over the years, working at desk jobs, et cetera, and they wanted to lose that weight. So we said, let's make a decision. We're going to set a goal together. Okay. And we decided we're going to lose 10 pounds together over the course of I think we set a 3-month timeline. So we gave ourselves a good amount of time. But we said every Friday we're going to check in with each other. We're going to send a note with where we are, but we're not just with what our number is in terms of our weight, but with actually how we're doing. What are we doing well at? What are we struggling with? And then if we're struggling with something, we're going to help each other. So it turns out one of the guys was traveling a lot for work, and he said, I'm working out more, but this travel has been really hard on my diet. I'm going to these dinners. I'm finding it hard to not eat the food that's offered. And it's usually very unhealthy, rich food that's going to make me put on weight. So what do I do? So we helped him troubleshoot around that. So all of this just to say that, change alone is hard, but making a pact with somebody to make changes makes it easier. Starting small is also important. Start with one thing. Don't try to do a whole bunch of changes at once. And the third is make sure you're taking moments to thank and appreciate the changes. Thank yourself, but also appreciate the changes you are seeing. And to talk to your friends and family about that because they can become positive sources of affirmation.
I resonate with all of that. All of that. Those are great ideas. Thank you. I'm wondering, how important do you think is loving yourself to being able to make connections? And I'm going back to something that you said
Yeah.
earlier. And I think that as that being a problem, low self-esteem, low sense of worth, self-worth, do you think you have to love yourself to be able to love other people?
Hmm. I think it's very hard to love other people without having some love for yourself.
Yeah.
But look, these things aren't black and white. We all struggle, I think, with loving ourselves. Sometimes it's harder to love yourself than it is to love other people. Sometimes it's easier to be generous to others than to be kind to yourself. Sometimes we ourselves are the ones that are easiest to beat up in our lives, right? And we do that. A lot of us do that a lot, myself included. I've struggled with this my entire life since I was a kid, being often too harsh on myself. And there's a whole mythology around this. There's a narrative where we say if we're hard on ourselves, we'll push ourselves to do more. We'll be better, right? We won't be too soft on yourself because you won't push yourself. But this is not about pushing yourself. I want to be super clear on this. You can set high standards for yourself. You can push yourself to achieve wonderful things in the world. You can do that while still being kind to yourself. The price of progress does not have to be cruelty to oneself. And it's taken me years to really come to terms with that. But that said, like we're all going to struggle to some extent on this. Some days will be better than others. But when you have a little bit of love for yourself, you start to realize that that gives you peace and gives you confidence to go out into the world. And when you're in a place of peace and confidence, it's easier to be present with other people. It's easier to be generous with others. When your mind is predominantly occupied with yourself, because you're feeling like you're not enough, you're beating yourself up all the time, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling depressed as a result of that, it becomes actually harder to focus on other people. So I do think that love for yourself is really important. But I think how we talk about that matters because I think there is a strain of thought in society that people have just become too soft and that young people in particular are too soft. And that's the root of all of our problems. But I think part of what we got to do in society right now is to redefine strength and to define strength not as the loudest voice in the room or the person who can necessarily bench the most or the person who can take up the most space in a conversation or the person who can saber rattle the most. Like that is not what real strength is. Real strength comes from knowing yourself, from loving yourself, from having the courage to love others, from having the courage to be generous and kind to others as well. That's the kind of strength I want my son and daughter to exhibit, to cultivate, and then ultimately to demonstrate for the world. But that's the kind of strength I think we've got to teach our kids. And so, yeah, it's like I think for me and a lot of people, it's a daily effort. And
Mhm.
sometimes loving yourself again doesn't have to be something you do every moment of the day, but if there's just one moment in a day where you can pause and just appreciate something about yourself, something good that you did that day, uh, that's all you need to get started, you know? And so actually, I was to ask you, Scarlett, like what's one thing that you feel good about that you've done today? I'm curious, like what would that be?
Well, you know what? I get up early every morning
Uh,
and sit down and I work. And I like to think that by 9 o'clock, I've done more than most people have done their entire day. So, like, being productive for me makes me feel really good, having
okay.
accomplished something and having learned something. If I can lay my head down on a pillow and learn something new every day, I'm happy.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Mm,
let me ask you, something that I've been struggling with in the choose love movement, and I'm just
mm,
curious. A lot of what you talk about in your book and what you're talking about seems, as you say, so simple. A lot of the connection skills and tools, though, to be able to navigate conversations and things like this, um, they're not innate within us. I mean, it is innate
mm,
to love and to need community, but we need to kind of learn how to have healthy relationships and we need to see what that looks like. And we don't always grow up with that influence. And so, I realized trying to find the solution to what happened at Sandy Hook that
mm,
I wanted to address the grievance end of the
mm.
pathway to violence. So I wanted to give kids. I
Oh,
love the cat.
oh,
I love that the cat
my
appeared.
goodness. Yes, out of nowhere. Oh my goodness.
Who is this?
This is my parents' cats. Actually, I'm actually at their house right now visiting them. So he's a wonderful little guy. We call him Laddu, which is an Indian sweet, actually.
I
Hey,
love
Laddu,
it.
I'm having a conversation. Can you come down?
I
Let
love
me
it.
just let him out. Just
Cat,
give me
cats
10
gravitate
seconds.
towards love. I'm honored.
Come on, come here, buddy. Come here, come here, come here, come here, come here. Come on,
That's
it's about
that's so
time.
sweet. And of course, we all love our aminals.
Oh, there we go. Yes.
Oh, that's so cute. I live on a farm. So I raised the
Oh,
boys on a farm, and that's what
uh-huh.
I wanted to do with chickens and horses and dogs and gardens. And so we Jesse called animals our aminals. So that's
Uh,
what I call them, forever. I love that. So addressing the grievance end of the pathway to violence, I believe, is the number one most overlooked aspect of
mm,
school safety today. Everyone focuses on problems like, the attack end of the pathway to violence, or even, recovery in substance abuse, the war on drugs. It just seems like we have a tendency to focus on the problem when focusing on a proactive preventative approach is actually necessary to get beyond the problem instead of just always a step behind and learning from mistakes. Do you agree with that?
well, look, I think you're spot on that we need to do more on the prevention side. And I think not just with violence, but I think across the board, we tend to be more problem oriented and deal with problems after they arise. And we do that in the healthcare system, for example, very little focus on preventing disease, a lot more focus on treating it after it arises. And here, I think the consequences of such a failure to focus on prevention are extraordinary, right? The consequences are literally in lives harmed and lost. And so I do think we need to look at the root causes. And I think for many people, who are experiencing the pain of a lack of belonging, of disconnection and loneliness and isolation, people deal with that pain in different ways, but in some people, it can manifest as anger and as violence. And so I think, and we've seen that, right? We, even more broadly with, extremist groups that develop with gang members who, when you talk to them about why they joined the gang, it's very interesting what the original roots are. I've spent time actually with people who have been parts of gangs and who have served long, sentences as a result, of violent crime. And what's very interesting is like what many of them tell me when I go into like the real like origins of like what brought you or compelled you to join the gang in the first place. For many of them, actually, it was a sense of loneliness. They felt like there was no place that was really home for them, no place they really belonged, and then the gang offered a family, offered a
Mm-hmm.
place of belonging. And you might think, well, didn't they know the consequences? They did, and they would talk about it. They were actually often were quite astute at understanding because of their own experience that being a part of a gang meant that you could lose your life, that you may be called to do things that might involve taking other people's lives. They knew these things, but the power and the need for belonging, that draw to community is so strong that sometimes we will even put ourselves in harm's way to
Mm-hmm.
experience community.
Mm-hmm.
So
That,
all of
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were finished. I was going to say, we have a prison program as well,
Hmm.
and I speak to school shooters, and
Hmm.
because I want to actually ask them the question I don't think anybody else is asking: how did we fail you? These are
Hmm.
children that are, killing other kids, and what happened. And I will tell you that they all say the same thing, and right
Hmm.
along the lines of what you're saying, Dr. Murthy, is that they didn't feel seen.
Hmm.
They didn't feel seen. And that is such a lonely place. It's a desperate place. They're desperate for attention. And going back to like this takes effort, and we know, for the most part, why people commit crimes, where violence comes from. Hurt people. What would you say to those listening? And a lot of them are parents and educators as well. How can we make those kids feel seen? And usually they're the kids that are are putting off a vibe that they don't want to be seen, and they're expressing in their behavior how they're feeling. So they may be prickly, and they may be the hardest people to give love to. How
Hmm.
do we overcome that?
Well, this is a really important question, and I think that there are a lot of kids in our schools who are hurting, at an emotional level, who don't feel seen, who don't feel like they belong. The word they would often use when I talk to them is invisible. They
Mm,
felt invisible, like if they disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even care.
yes.
And some people reacted to that feeling of invisibility with resignation, and others with resentment, right? And those can also lead to different paths. So I think the question that I find myself thinking about is, how do we help kids feel like they belong? How do we help them feel like they matter to others, that they are seen by
Mm,
others? Now, I think what we have assumed in years past is that this kind of just happens. That kids are in school, they make friends with each other, and they build community, and that it just kind of happens by default. But that was at a time where, again, the environment in which kids were growing up, particularly the digital environment, was very, very different. So we can no longer assume that that just happens. In fact, I think the opposite is happening now, which is that many kids are going through childhood without the experiences that lead to social skill development, right? And I saw this actually when I was touring colleges in particular, universities. Many of the university administrators would tell me that they were having to have conversations and training sessions for students on how to talk to your roommate because they were realizing there just wasn't comfort in talking about things like, I'm messy, you're neat. How do we manage that? I go to bed early, you go to bed late. How do we work this out? When I was touring the colleges, I also found something that was very disturbing, which was that the dining halls were quiet. Like when
mm,
I was in college, I remember the dining hall was the loudest place on campus because we were all just talking. We're catching up on our days. We were talking. But now I walked into the dining hall at the first university I remember visiting on our tour, and I thought my team had picked the wrong date. I was like, is this spring break? Are people not on campus? But then I looked around and I saw the students were there. They just weren't talking to each other. They were on their devices, right? So the thing I think we have to ask ourselves is number one, how do we proactively train kids like with the social skills and tools they need to build relationships and have conversation? I think the second thing is that we have to think about how to create spaces where kids can actually engage in meaningful activity together. And that could be sports. It can also be service. It could be the arts. But kids need to be able to do things together. When we do things together in person, that can actually help us talk, build connection, find common ground. It's one of the reasons I actually think that being a part of a team is such an important part of the growing up experience, whether it's a sports team or whether it's a chorus or an orchestra or whether it's any other sort of team that's trying to deliver or create something together. And then finally, as parents, I actually think we need to support each other in these efforts because so many parents are walking around today feeling like they're failing as parents. They see their kids struggling, they see a mental health crisis unfolding, and they don't know what to do about it. The top two reasons why parents say parenting is so much harder now than it was a generation ago are technology and social media. This is what pops up on survey after survey, right? But when I talk to parents, I realize many of them would say, hey, it feels like all these other parents have figured out like how to manage social media. No one's really talking about it. I'm the only one who I just don't have my act together. I don't know how to manage this with my kids. But the reality is that most parents are actually struggling with this. We're just not talking enough about this and working together on how to manage this. So the last thing I would offer here is that in order to reclaim our in-person relationships, we have to recreate tech-free spaces and zones in our life, right? That doesn't mean that we completely abandon technology. I mean, well, that's not happening and shouldn't happen. There are things we've gained from technology that we want to keep. But what it doesn't mean is that we've got to start uh, putting these boundaries in place so technology doesn't run our lives, but instead we make the decision on where technology has a role. Now, we can do that starting in very simple ways, right? We could say, okay, with meal times, we're going to have a rule that we're not going to have devices at the table. So we can just talk to each other. We could have a rule, like as many schools are doing now, an increasing number, that in school we are not going to allow the use, of social media devices, and we can have parameters around when it would be allowed or circumstances under which a child could access their device. But by and large, we're going to try to keep the classroom experience an in-person experience. And the other thing you can do is around sleep, right? Is to make the decision that you're going to make sleep a tech-free experience. And you might say, isn't sleep a tech-free experience already? Answer is no, it turns out for most people, because many people are going to bed, let's say at 11 o'clock, and then they're up till midnight scrolling on their devices. And then they get up at 2 a.m., right, to get a glass of water or go to the bathroom. And then they reflexively check their phone. And for the next 15 minutes or so, they're going through their inbox. And you think it's easier to just go back to sleep, but no, you interrupt your sleep cycles, you turn on a bright light, and you're looking at your phone, then it becomes harder to fall asleep, right? And so our sleep in both in quality and quality is being disrupted. So as parents, these are a number of fronts where we can start to take action as parents and as schools. But again, I just want to come back to something I said early on, which is that all of this change is hard to do alone, which is why seeing more parents coming together to support each other in making these changes, whether it's in again making the learning experience technology free, or whether it's drawing boundaries around the use of social media at home, or whether it's calling for better policies in schools or in government to help protect our kids from the harms of technology. Well, whatever it is, like if we can support each other as parents in this work, then it becomes a lot more sustainable. And ultimately, this is a long-term game, right? This is not like a problem that we solve in a week or a month, right? But this is the work I think now of raising a child in the modern era is involves trying to figure out how we create experiences and skills for them that we previously took for granted, like skills in building relationships, having in-person connection, and we're having opportunities to work and to serve and to play together so that ultimately our kids can build the community that they need.
That's so beautiful. And then as parents, because you were talking about walking into universities in the
Mhm.
cafeterias, I go to airports and other places, restaurants, where you would think that it would be loud and it's quiet. So I resonated with that too.
Yeah.
As parents, we need to model this. And when we model it, I mean, that's what I tried to do for JT, for my older son after Jesse's murder, model what moving through tragedy looked like. And in doing so, it helped me rise to become the best version of myself just because I was trying to model for him. So parents can do that. Dr. Murthy, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And I'm wondering, what is the parting prescription that you would give our audience as we kind of wrap up our session here?
Well, first, I just want to thank you as well, Scarlett, for this wonderful conversation, but more importantly, for the movement that you built to help people choose love over fear, which is one of the hardest choices to make, but one of the most important ones. And I know this was inspired and driven in part by the tragedy you went through with Jesse. But I would hope that Jesse's looking down and at everything that you have done and feeling incredibly proud uh, because what you've done is really remarkable. So just thank you for being a role model for everything that we talked about today. I think for parents out there, for everyone who's watching, who's feeling the anxiety and worry that comes with just being a human being in 2025 and consuming all of the news and hearing about all the events that we are experiencing today. I just want people to know that there actually is a path forward here through which we can find some relief, some peace, and some happiness and fulfillment. And that path it's not complicated. It's simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy. But the choices that we make each day, for example, to reach out to someone we care about, to be present with somebody when they're talking to us and put away our devices, the choice we make to do one small thing to help somebody each day, to spend a few minutes in solitude at some point during our day where we can just breathe, let the noise settle, and just remember something we're grateful for. These small choices are the building blocks for a fulfilling life. They are what will help us day after day to get through what feel like really challenging times. But I do want people to know that this work that we are doing, especially that of helping our kids to be healthy and happy and have a foundation for fulfillment, this is sacred work. This is the work that people have done for millennia. But I know that sometimes today it can feel like it's not that important or not as valued. Sometimes it can feel like the work that we do as parents is less important than what we may do to earn a salary or what we may do to, sort of have a set of achievements that the public can look at and say, that person's really made it. But even though parenting isn't as valued as it should be in modern culture, I still believe it is among the most important things that we do in society. And the work that parents are doing is not just for them and it's not just for their kids, it's for all of society. Because without a healthy next generation, who's going to continue society forward? Who's going to make sure society is well? So parents are making an investment for all of society. And so I just want, folks out there who are finding this moment tough, just to know that any of these small steps that we talk about, reaching out to others, helping one person, taking 5 minutes of solitude to just remember something that you're grateful for, to appreciate yourself. These are seemingly small things, but they're actually big things. And when we do them consistently over time, they can really help us in profound ways. So I'm just grateful for the chance to have this conversation together. I'm grateful there are people who care about living a better life and about creating an opportunity for our kids to do the same. And I hope that as we go back to our days and our lives, that we'll remember that this work that we are immersed in, of living a life that's rooted in love, that's informed by compassion, that's inspired by generosity and courage, that this is not an effort to transform us into something that we're not. This is an effort to return to who we always have been. We come into the world just equipped and designed to give love. We are rooted in love from the earliest of our hours and days. And things happen to us, traumas, experiences, challenges that maybe lead us away from that path. But the time we spend with kids, the honest moments we have with each other remind us of our true roots. And I see that in my own kids. The other day, I was sitting at the dining table with my 7 and 8 year old. My daughter, in a playful mood, just tossed a small ball at me. I do a lot of catch with them because I want them to have good hand-eye coordination. And so she just, as part of that effort, just surprised me and threw this little ball at me. And I instinctively reached for it. But I had been dealing with this frozen shoulder for a few months at that time. And for anyone who's experienced a frozen shoulder, the last thing that you want to do when you have a frozen shoulder is sudden movements. And that's exactly what I did. So immediately I felt this lancing pain through my shoulder, and I like dropped to the ground and I was clutching my shoulder with my eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the pain to subside. And it was in that moment that I felt a small hand on my shoulder. And then I felt a small head lean against mine. And I opened my eyes, and it was my 8 year old son just looking at me, concerned and trying to comfort me. My son was not trained to do this. He didn't go through sensitivity classes. He did this because it was his instinct. When he saw someone in pain, he reached out. And that's the instinct that we come into this world with. So it gives me great reassurance to know that we fundamentally are not broken, that we are not bad people fundamentally. We have the right ingredients. This is our chance to just clear the debris and the dust away and to allow who we really are to shine through. And if we can do that, then I have no doubt that with the power of our love and compassion and generosity, with the power of the community that allows us to build, that we can create a life for ourselves and for our kids that is deeply fulfilling and that is full of joy.
Wow.
Mm.
Thank you so much. And I want you to know that myself and everyone listening is coming on board. We are a movement and we are unstoppable and we are creating that world in the way that you described it. So
Mm.
I just want to thank you so much for being such a huge inspiration, joining us today, for everything that you've done and will do. And know that the Choose Love movement is squarely behind you, together with you, shoulder to shoulder, walking the path. I love Rumi's quote, we're all just walking each other home. And
Oh,
really, that's the truth. So
yeah.
thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Scarlett. What a joy to be with you. And I look forward to being in touch and working together on this important movement that we're all a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks so much. We'll be in touch, Scarlett. Okay. Take care.